Archbishop Claudio Maria Celli, thank you so much for receiving us today at the Pontifical Council for Social Communications.
It's a pleasure for me to have you here.
It's an honor to have you part of our network. You're certainly not unknown by our network as the president of this council and as a great encourager and supporter of our efforts. Before I talk to you about the very important work of this Pontifical Council, tell us a little bit about your background, a fascinating background, the Secretary of State and the Council Administration, your interest in China and Israel. I first met you in Israel in 1993 as you brought over the Accords to be signed. Tell us about this fascinating career.
As you know, I was born in Italy, 1941.
You're young.
Yes, accumulated youth, I would say. And I discovered my vocation quite late. And when I decided to enter the seminary, my bishop was inviting me to go to Rome for my studies in philosophy and theology. I was a student of the Pontifical Roman Seminary. I was ordained priest the 19th of March, 1965. And after 1 year working in my home diocese, I was invited to attend the training in the Pontifical Academy for diplomacy activity of the Holy See. And so I entered in Piazza della Minerva in 1966. And I started my studies in canon law. And I ended my training in 1970. And I was sent as my first mission in Central America, Honduras, where I stayed 2 years and a half working in the nunciature in Tegucigalpa. And afterwards I left the diplomatic service of the Holy See. I think that I am one of the few cases. I left the service of the Holy See and I remained in Central America, in Honduras, as a missionary.
As a diocesan priest from Italy.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So my bishop allowed me to stay in Tegucigalpa. Mm-hmm. And the local Episcopal conference appointed me delegate of the Episcopal Conference for the family apostolate. Mm-hmm. And so I was the national chaplain advisor of the Movimento Familiar Cristiano. Mm. So I dedicated my years of my youth to family activity. Afterwards, some situations advised me to go back to the diplomatic service of the Holy See. Mm-hmm. And so I started again and I was sent to Manila during the Marcos regime. And I stayed in Manila 4 years. And afterwards, I was sent to Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I was working in the nunciature during 3 years. In 1982, I was called back to Rome to work in the Secretariat of State, the second section, the section of the relations with states. And I was, I would say, they entrusted to me a part of the Asian desk. Mm-hmm. And so I was involved little by little in all the problems connected with India, Pakistan, Vietnam, and later on also China. So I started to be involved with the life of the church in China since 1983.
Fascinating.
Fascinating experience. I would say one of my best experiences in my life. Really, I treasure these years because are not yet over. Mm-hmm. I'm continuing to work for the church in China.
Thank God.
And so really, for me, it was one of the main subjects of my main thrusts in my priestly life, working in the Secretariat of State. And as you know, in 1990, I was appointed by the Holy Father, the Blessed John Paul II, Undersecretary of the second section for relations with states. In a civil term, it would be the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. And so I was involved on the world sector because we have only one undersecretary, and so I was in charge of the whole world, following the situation of the church in the different countries. But certainly my special point of reference was Vietnam and China. After 5 years, so we are in 1995, December 95, the Holy Father was appointing me secretary of the administration of the Holy See. APSA.
APSA is the word.
APSA, exactly. Where I was, and I was working in this sector during 11 years and a half. But the main reason was because I was involved with Vietnam and China. And so officially my job was secretary of the administration of the Holy See, but also my activity was in such an involvement with Vietnam and China. And I can tell you were the best years of my life in a certain sense, because I was enjoying deeply such a work, such an activity for the church in China, especially.
Let's just speak about those two churches, the church in China, the church in Vietnam, which are very much in the news these days.
Yeah.
I think you know of our efforts at Salt and Light Television, our whole Chinese department.
Yeah.
In fact, just the other day, we began the newscasts in Mandarin. We have them in Cantonese, now we have Mandarin.
Great.
What signs of hope do you see for the church in Vietnam and the church in China?
I can tell you this. I was the first one. I started in 1990. My first visit to Vietnam, Hanoi, was in 1989. I was one of the delegation headed by Cardinal Echegaray. But afterwards, I was starting the official visits of the Holy See to Vietnam, and our first meetings with the government of Vietnam. And so I could be present in Vietnam 1 week every year. And after some days dedicated to unofficial talks with the government, the delegation of the government, I was allowed to pay some visits to some dioceses in the country. And I tell you that really were beautiful experiences. Because it was the first time for the Catholic community to enter in contact, to meet a representative of the Holy See. After all the general situation of the country, as you can imagine. So I was visiting many dioceses because I was realizing, I was, doing 7 visits to Vietnam. And so really I got the opportunity to visit some parts of the North Vietnam, Central Vietnam, and South Vietnam. And it was really a beautiful occasion to enter in communion with the local bishops, the clergy, and the fervent, wonderful local Catholic community.
Certainly your paths would have crossed with Cardinal Van Thuan.
Exactly.
The late Cardinal Van Thuan. Your memories of Cardinal Van Thuan.
I have a very great, deep memories of Cardinal Van Thuan. I can say that he was honoring me with his friendship. So if you remember when he left Vietnam under pressure, I was the first person to see him when he arrived in Rome.
Really?
Yeah. So really, we could talk frankly, openly, friendly,
Without fear.
with this heartful attitude.
Yeah.
You know, Carrier Bantuan was a gentle, very devoted, strong in faith, and dedicated person. Is really those, I would say, magic moments in your life when you meet a significant person for your life and the life of the church. And I tell you also, my my deep appreciation in my life is to work closely with Blessed John Paul II. And so really I keep in my heart some special moments of working together with him quite closely, especially in connection with these moments of the local church in China and Vietnam. Why? Because Blessed John Paul II was deeply interested. I can tell you also, not long before his death, he was asking me if he could go to China, to pay a visit to China. And so I was working until 2007. And in 2007, Pope Benedict XVI was sending me here in the Pontifical Council for Social Communication.
And your reaction when you were assigned here? You're following Cardinal Foley?
Who was an expert. I myself, I was not an expert in communication. I must be honest. My life was involved in the diplomatic service of the Holy See. And during the last 11 years and a half, I was involved in administration. During this period, yes, it is true, I was responsible of the website of the Holy See, the Vatican.va. And so my only contact with communication was really in such an involvement with the responsibility of the official site of the Holy See. And so really I was obliged to become an humble student, because my promise was to know, to understand, to perceive what communication is today. And it was not an easy moment, because I was obliged to reconsider my life and to be involved in perspectives, in activities were not so familiar to me. And especially after the presence for so many years of Mgr Foley, who was really an expert in communication. He was a director, as you know, of an important Catholic newspaper in the States.
In Philadelphia, yes.
Exactly. And also he was graduated. He was having a doctorate, if I am not wrong, in communication. And so really he was the right man in the right place. I myself, I was obliged to read, and to listen. It means that I dedicated the first year of my presence here, and I would say also more, in listening.
But I must say, Your Excellency, in these past years, you have proven not only to be an excellent student of communications, but you made that shift very well from the diplomatic world to learning the vocabulary, and not just the vocabulary, the method of transmitting that. I mean, this new media world is changing by the hour.
Of you for such an appreciation.
And I say that as somebody who had to do the same thing. We've had to learn. I come from the biblical world, not the world of new media, iPhones and iPads. But what I'm impressed with, and what many people have said, is how a diplomat of the Vatican, expert in China and Vietnam, and even with the Israel Accords with the Holy See.
Oh yes, there was a great event, if you remember,
Yes.
in 1993.
I was there. I was a student at the École Biblique. I came to the ceremony.
Yeah, we did something historical, I would say, because with Dr. Bailing, who was the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel, we signed the well-known fundamental agreement.
Right, which is now slowly unfolding.
Exactly, between the Holy See and Israel. And really, we were having the perception that we were doing something historic. And I can tell you just a very, I would say, nice moment, because after the signing of this agreement, I came back to Rome. And I was immediately received by the Holy Father. And he told me, in his own way, because he was really loving to joke, and he was telling me, you are worse than the Pope, because you were having too many photographers and television sets. It is true.
I saw them all, I remember.
Because if you remember the place where we were signing the agreement, it was overcrowded by the television of all over the world. And was a very, very significant moment for my life. And I can tell you honestly that after that moment and all the meetings that took place before the signature of the agreement, I became friend, for example, of Dr. Bailing.
Yossi Beilin.
Yeah, Yossi Beilin. I consider him really a nice friend in my life, because we were sharing delicate moments, because he was leading the delegation of Israel, and I myself, I was leading the delegation of the Holy See. And was really a moment to know each other and to establish a very good human relationship, I would say a friendly relationship. And so when I go to Jerusalem, I'm trying to pay a visit to him, and when he comes to Rome, he is coming to see me. And this is very nice.
You know, there's a wonderful French proverb that says, une plume divine écrit notre histoire.
Exactly.
This divine pen that's writing the history. And I could see this pen at work in your life through the intricate world of Vatican diplomacy, to these great moments with China, Vietnam, Israel, and now here.
Here we are now in this service of the Holy See, working in the Pontifical Council for Social Communication. And as I was telling you before, I spent a lot of time really visiting, going around, and trying to understand what it happens. What is the real situation of the Church in the field of communication? And also, if you remember, there was a special approach to the academic world. Because I myself, not being an expert, my problem was to know exactly also in a deeper and strong consultation with the academic world, perceiving from the professors who are teaching in the faculties of social communication what is going on, what happens in the world, and logically also what is happening in the Church. And this is really a special moment of a deeper reflection and involvement. And if you remember, after the academic world, we were having an international congress with people coming from the various faculties of social communication in Catholic universities around the world. And if I'm not mistaken, we were having people coming from 46 countries.
That's right.
It was a very exciting moment.
What is the purpose of these seminars? Now, you've gone through several of them.
Yes,
and
because
what do you see as the
now
fruits?
we are trying to have the same reflection in the different continents. We were having it already in the States. We were having a meeting with universities, faculties coming from various universities of the States. We were having this in Asia. We were doing this already something in Latin America. And we are planning to do this also in Africa. It means that our interest is to have these people who are professors, who are knowing what is happening really in the field of communication from an academic perspective, to have a reflection together. Because we realize little by little, but more and more, that communication is just not only a problem of technical aspects, but is a problem of the human beings involved.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think one of the risks in this ever-developing, rapidly changing world of communications is the human person will be forgotten with all of this.
For sure. But that, you know, communication really is a problem. There is a human dimension. It's not only a technological perspective. We must realize this. And if it is a human dimension, certainly are appearing new, I would say, situations, new perspectives. And the problem is that the human being is involved in communication, is involved in receiving communication. As you know, I'm not to tell you these things, but new technologies are really play a major interactive role. But there is a funny thing, and for me is a challenge, a personal challenge. Why? Because I am coming, I would say, from another culture. In my perspective, when I have a free time, I like to sit down, to have a good music, and to have a good book in my hands. But certainly the young generations, they prefer to spend their free time in front of a screen of a PC.
And what do you see as a challenge there? What's the problem there?
It's a challenge because I have to reconsider also my culture, my way of living, my way of thinking, my way of relationship with others. You know, in our culture, we are accustomed to have a special language, I would say. But now language is changing. And I want that the message that I have in my heart, that is the message of the gospel, be understood by the people of today. I need to use a language that is understandable by our people today. It is a nice thing also. During a conference, I was talking about new technologies. Mm-hmm. And a young man stood up and he told me in a very frank and open way, you know, Monsignor, you are talking about new technologies. They are new for you who are old. But for me, my technologies are not new. And I told him immediately, you are right. We are talking about new technologies because we are already belonging, in a certain sense, to another generation. But for these new generations, the young generations who are digital born, they are their own technologies, are not new for them, are new for us. But my problem is today is, Father Tom, to realize what language today the young generations, the human beings are using. Because we have the risk, and this I think is a big challenge for us. The challenge for the church today is to be able to have a deep, real, respectful dialogue with the digital culture. Today, technologies are not only an instrument. Technologies today are originating a new way of living,
It's a culture.
It's a culture. And my problem is to see how I am able to have a real deep dialogue, and I would join also a respectful dialogue with this culture. Because it means that I am in a position to have a dialogue, to be able to have a dialogue with women and men of today.
Now there are those, let me play the devil's advocate here, there are those who will say in the church, perhaps some bishops and priests, that the church has to be very careful about entering that world. How is it possible, for example, to transmit age-old teachings, centuries-old teachings and foundational aspects of the faith in Twitter with 140 characters? Or how can you use a website to teach? How can you be involved in this? What's your response to people who would question why the church should be there?
I would say that the church has the duty, because this is its foundation, has the duty to announce the gospel. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that we have to talk, to announce the gospel to women and men of today. And this is a process, I would say, of incarnation. The Word of God, the message of the gospel, has to incarnate in the culture of today. You know, faith, as you know, is certainly, there are contents of faith. But the way of teaching, the way of expressing, the way of formulating the same message of the gospel is changing. You can perceive here in Rome. The same faith was expressed in the first, I would say, Paleo-Christian churches. Mm-hmm. Consider how the Gothic period was expressing the same faith, or the Renaissance period was expressing the same faith. Because faith needs to incarnate to be a real moment of life for the people. Today, my problem is to see how we are faithful totally to the message of the gospel, I would say, to the teaching of the church.
Your Excellency, I want to stop there. Our time is up, but I can't thank you enough. What we've experienced in this interview, the brains behind the Pontifical Council for Social Communications, standing on the shoulders of the giants, Cardinal Foley, Blessed John Paul II, the servant of God, Paul VI, a rich diplomatic career that's now at the service of spreading the good news. On behalf of all of us in Canada, thank you, and thank you for the support of Salt and Light Television and your confidence and trust in me.
Nice to have you here.
It's a privilege to work with you on the council.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Many, many thanks to you
Thanks.
also for this opportunity. Thank you.